And finally, Wargaming is announcing all the changes to the next season, to the next update, to the next meta that we are getting in World of Tanks Blitz. And I'm really looking forward to it. We know a lot about the changes from the leaks already, but keep in mind the leaks were partially incorrect and some tanks were completely missing in there. So there will definitely be a lot of stuff that we will have to talk about here. I will do 3 videos here because Wargaming is just releasing a set of nations on each day for 3 days in a row. So we will talk about the individual changes, how I judge them, which tanks are going to be great. And as a follow-up, I will also do a highlight video just summarizing all of this again. When we have all the details, we also know a little bit better again how these tanks compare against each other there. But let's actually dive into it here with, actually before we're getting to the changes, I want to just mention something special here because Wargaming actually just gave us some clue about how they are actually balancing all the kind of stuff here, all the balance changes that they are doing. Finally, they were actually just giving a bit more of a reason. So let's just move my camera out of the way here. So, number 1, changing the meta and overall gameplay. We aim to shift the focus away from the most popular and or the strongest tanks, allowing less popular and weaker tanks to shine. This is crucial for maintaining game balance. You see, the best tanks are getting some nerfs, some weaker tanks or average tanks might get some buffs. Like that, the meta is evolving. And that is really something that many people are struggling to grasp or to really like about Blitz. You are having some meta that is constantly shifting. We are not always having the same game. And I think that is also very important to keep it interesting. I can barely imagine playing the same game in the same state for 7, 8, 9, 10 years in a row there. So some not daily changes, but yearly changes are actually going to make it a bit more enjoyable to all of us. Then number 2, reducing turbo battles. We want to minimize the occurrence of extremely fast-paced battles. This is something that Wargaming is working on for a long time already, just occasionally making some changes into that direction. They want to diminish the amount of these steamroll battles, often we call them like that, where one team is just rolling over the other. Often, of course, it's due to just unbalanced teams, but also it has to do with some tanks being just very strong at putting out a lot of damage in a very short amount of time. So Wargaming is just trying to counter that, which is also the next reason here, or the next idea that they are giving, decreasing the prevalence of auto-loading tanks at tier X. This is also just helping the games be lasting a little bit longer. Again, the auto-loaders were actually buffed not too long ago with the equipment changes. Now they are getting some nerfs again, and you will be able to see that on many tanks that we are going to check out today. And number 4, reducing the survivability of tank destroyers against medium tanks and light tanks. This is also a good thing, and in many situations, although I like playing TDs quite aggressively, so for some it might not be all that great, but of course some really strong campers which you can also not circle and stuff, that's going to be annoying. So yeah, I understand the point there, although I mostly do see the autoloaders or the TDs to be somewhat of a passive heavy tank usually. Alright, let's dive into it. We are starting with the Germans here. The Leo 1 is the first one on the list. The Leo 1 actually does get a big reload nerf. 0.5 seconds more on the reload time and only 6.2 that it had before. That's a big change. That's just going to be a lot worse here on a DPM side. Still, the Leo had the best DPM before. After these changes, it will still have 3.5k DPM, which is going to be around average, middle field, maybe a bit on the lower side already. Still, the Leo is going to be very, very fast. We do see another little bit of a nerf here on the hit points, 50 hit points less. Yeah, that's also not great. Power to rate ratio also changing, rotation speed also changing, but let's not forget that this tank also gets gear oil provisions on top, which is the provision that gets you 6% to the engine power, 6% to the traverse speed, and also 4 km/h plus to the top speed and the top reverse speed as well. And these 6% do happen to exactly even out the nerfs here on the power to rate ratio and the rotation speed. So that is not really a nerf in that sense here, only that because of that you will lose one provision slot which you previously used for probably like the 3% crew mastery or protective kit. So you might lose some aim time or so for that. and also a little bit of DPM compared to before again. So again, a nerf there, but still it's not too much, and actually it gets to be faster than it has been before, especially in reverse, because the reverse speed does get a buff from 23 to 25 plus the gear oil 4 kilometers per hour. That is actually going to be super fast in return. Then I do think that this is quite good here for this tank. But also the gun turn limit does get a nerf here, which is probably the gun depression that Wargaming is trying to address here from 8 to 7 degrees. So that will make things a lot harder, because 8 to 7 doesn't sound like much if you're seeing it just being 1 degree, but from 8 to 7, that's 1/8 less there. That's actually not nothing at all. So yeah. Okay, Leo will just struggle a bit more. For the average player, it should still be fine, to be honest. Because for the average player, don't count on the DPM all too much. It's more for the top players who are used to using the maximum DPM that this tank is going to be a lot worse. For that, it also gets the adaptive concealment mechanic, which we do know from the VZ light tank, or also the 1-to-1B. That one also has it, which gets you unspotted after only 7 seconds instead of the 10. So this tank will be even stronger at flanking around. Also with the mobility, just going to be worse at putting out that damage from behind. I think it's still going to be usable, although I will probably not enjoy it all too much. With the lack of gun depression, you definitely have to flank around. You cannot fight the enemies frontally at all anymore. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Next up, we've got the E50M, and this is one of the most dominant tanks here on these changes, I would say. E50M getting an armor buff, first of all. Let me just point out one thing. This tank is a tank that I play at about 90% win rate in Platoon. I've recently streamed it in a Platoon session as well, so if you're interested in that. But yeah, this tank has already been super strong, just not being that prevalent. Actually, there were many tanks that were played instead, and it does actually get a big buff here. The E50M is a superb tank at face hugging already. It can just bully all other mediums. It can ram any other mediums because it rates almost like a heavy tank. It's 50% heavier than most mediums, and it does get an armor buff here to the sides, mostly all the way around there. The sides get some buffs. And also you do get some reload time buff, so DPM buff of 0.4 seconds here. Also that is a lot. And then the main thing here, reactive armor consumable, 27% damage reduction when you are getting shot. So that is huge here for the E50M. So you can basically just go for Platoon, YOLO any medium that you see, pull off that reactive armor, you're barely losing any hit points. Maybe you're losing half your hit points, but hey, you are just going to have 1 tank, 2 tanks out of the fight. It's going to be so easy. You can even YOLO some heavy tanks like that. If you're seeing the reactive armor consumable, it, as that, it decreases the damage taken, which can also be seen as momentarily increasing your hit point pool if you are using that correctly. So you are getting into the realms of the hit points of a heavy tank, basically, while also having a tank that is capable of side scraping, that is capable at playing hull down really well, unless the enemies have a ton of penetration and you do use premium ammunition to penetrate your turret. But that is not a given fact in random games, to be fair. Big nerf there to the speed shell, which is actually the shell velocity. I don't know who messed up there, but shell velocity nerf from 1.5k to 1.1k. That is a big change here, like a 30% reduction. And I am not happy about this, because this means to me that I will probably just switch to supercharger then instead, because, you know, if you're having like many mediums all at the same shell velocity roughly, and then there is one medium being significantly slower on a shell velocity, then you would have to theoretically adjust to that single tank each time that you play it, which is not just going along with the muscle memory that you build up over the years. So I think I will just go for the supercharger there instead, which then is an aim time nerf effectively. But hey, I think that's still going to be fine, because the E50M is strongest at a close distance. Anyways, it's not a good tank for farming at a distance. There will be more mediums with the same change. I will get back to those later on. Moving on, E100 here on the top right side does have some very interesting changes as well. It does have two guns, as most of you know, although most of you will never have played a small gun even. But the big one is now getting some big nerfs. Actually, it's going to be nerfed on the penetration just a little bit. Alpha damage is getting nerfed from 680 to 660. Let's keep in mind it had 640 in the past, got buffed to 680, now back to 660. And also the dispersion does increase here on that big gun. Also, hull rotation speed does get nerfed on the big gun only, weirdly. Yeah, I don't know what's the reason exactly, but you can see that there is no mention of any reload time buff to counter that. So the alpha damage nerf is an effective DPM nerf as well. So you're going to be less accurate and are going to have less damage output per shot and per minute as well. So big changes there to the 100. But the DPM of the small gun increases significantly. Reload time from the 128mm gun increases from 12.46 to 10.55. Look at that, that's 2 seconds less on a reload time, and like that, the E100 is actually going to have a shorter reload time than the mouse even, so it's going to be a pretty good DPM tank actually. And it does also, I mean, it's not really like huge DPM, but still 460 alpha, a lot of armor, a lot of hit points. It's going to be very nice to play. This one also, the penetration gets increased on the small gun. The aim time does get a big buff here as well from 5.9 to 4.8. And on top of that, there's also a power to rate ratio buff to the E100, which means you can accelerate a lot faster there. So definitely look out for applying the E100 with that small gun in the future. I will definitely try it on my own as well. And next we've got the Jagdpanzer E100 or Jagdpanzer in German hunting tank. This one does get some changes that I'm not all too happy about, although it won't really change the position all too much here. The hit point pool decreases from 2.15k to 2000 only, 150 less. That's half a shot of most mediums. It's going to be noticeable a little bit because this tank is usually played quite aggressively. But the main changes that I'm not happy about, aim time nerf 4.9 to 5.3 and reload time nerf as well. This tank does have fairly good DPM for a big alpha gun. It is fairly accurate, but not having great aim time at all. So I'm really not happy about this because just missing some more shots means you're having to reload 18 seconds again. For that, it at least gets a bit of an armor buff here to the superstructure. That is actually going to be a bit helpful because mostly since the equipment changes, the calibrated shells get some penetration buff, so more people are playing with calibrated shells, so you are weaker on that superstructure, and therefore that is being counted there. Overall, I think the Jag is going to stick to its position that it already has right now, maybe going to be slightly worse in win rate because of just these DPM changes and the hit point pool there. But yeah, let's move on. Next up, the mouse over here. Let's just shove me into that right corner again. Mouse getting a DPM buff, only a small one, a slight dispersion nerf, not too mentionable, but the mouse is already very strong. It will just keep its place, be slightly stronger even in the future then. And we can already move on to the KPZ-50T. This one is one of the highest DPM tanks in the game. It does have almost like 3.8k DPM, and it does have the tungsten rounds and adrenaline. Both of those add to the DPM effectively. So that is a tank that is getting a big change here as well, or just a semi-big change, which is going to help it a lot because the biggest downside to the KPZ is definitely the aim time and accuracy on the move, apart from just the acceleration. And that is something that's really not good on this tank, which I personally really dislike. But still, aim time buff is going to be very nice. 4 to 3.6 is also quite a difference there. Slight changes to the penetration, slight nerfs there, but not too mentionable. You barely will notice the difference there. Next one, Grille 15 here to the top right, rotation speed buff from 35.7 to 40.2 basically. That is actually a big change here on this tank. That's going to be a lot there on the rotation speed. Also the reload time gets a slight buff, power to rate ratio gets a slight buff, maximum speed gets a slight buff. This tank is not having any armor, as you all know. It is a tank that is good at relocating and getting in some different angles to shoot enemies into the sides, but the main weakness about the Grille is actually the gun depression of the front, where you only have like 5 degrees and you are having more gun depression to the side. So constantly when you are having someone flank to your front, you have to turn your tank, and like that you are increasing the dispersion, and yeah, just like that you're just also struggling a lot with that bad dispersion on the move there. And I think that's the main problem that I'm having with this one, not really getting circled. Some more mobility might help nonetheless. I will see how it goes. I think it really doesn't really change the state too much there for the Grille. So let's move on. VK9001P, I guess it is actually called. It is one of the strongest heavy tanks in the game right now, and also a tank that I'm still having available on a giveaway. So it just stay up for the next giveaways there. But anyways, VK90 gets an aim time buff. It is already a very accurate high alpha heavy tank. 460 alpha is a lot. It does get 5.4 to 5.1 on that aim time. For that, it gets a bit of a rotation speed turret speed rotation. Let's just read it in reverse. Nerf here, although 2 degrees here, yeah, it's something, but it's not going to be bothering all too much here because you're mostly side scraping anyways. You get a bit of a dispersion nerf on the turret rotation as well, but you do also have that stabilization mechanic, which means you always have minimum dispersion up to 15 kilometers per hour on your speed. So I think the VK90 will also stay in position as it is right now. And next one here on the German tech tree is the VK7101. It does get a bit of a penetration nerf. Nothing too big there, but a big reload time nerf here, almost 1 anti-second longer. That is actually a very big change here to that VK72. Currently it is very dominant among the super heavies, so I am not going to be too mad about this change, to be honest. Not a tank that I personally play all too much anyways, but with the E100 big gun also getting nerfed, VK72, well, that leaves us with other big super heavies still with big guns. We don't know all the changes yet about 114 SP2, BZ75 and also the 60TP, so stay tuned for the next videos on those ones. Slight dispersion buff actually still, just to mention that one as well. And we are going to have the Concept 1B getting some changes here as well. Now on the American tech tree, Concept 1B getting a reload time buff of just 0.2 seconds, not all too big. Slight dispersion nerf on the turret rotation, not all too big either. I think Concept 1B also just going to stay in position as it is right now. T124 then, the American TD with a turret getting a nerf to the power to weight ratio ever so slightly. Rotation speed nerf as well. Also just a slight one. View range nerf as well, only just a slight one. But aim time buff on top of that, and sandbag provision, which is the kind of provision that you pack into your tank that gives you 6% to the hit point pool, which should be like about 100 hit points or so that you get on top of the ones that you are having. So that is quite helpful for a tank that is anyways more of a heavy supporter tank. I think it will be good for this one also with the aim time. You can play this tank a bit more aggressively even, or at least you're not getting punished all that much for being aggressive, and you will also increase your win rate like that. I believe only good changes here to the E4, so slightly getting buffed. XM66F to the top right here is one of the strongest TDs in the game at the moment. It does get a slight aim time nerf here from 5.0 to 5.1, and also a reload time buff here. That is actually very good because it already has massive TPM. Not a big change again, but still it is a reload time buff. You are just going to win any 1v1 with this tank. You do already. Then we get some different shell types here. Let's also point that one out. From AP on the standard ammunition to APCR in the future, then an APCR does have reverse shell normalization. You effectively have reverse penetration like that. I will explain shell normalization in a different place. But just to keep that in mind, it will just slightly decrease the penetration values on that tank. But a DPM buff for every experienced player, the penetration won't be too noticeable anyways, neither the aim time nerf there. Then we are moving on to the E3, and I will also have to quickly move away the camera again. The E3 is the turreted TD, non-turreted TD here on the Americans, which does get some changes. It has been very strong in the past, then PBR was introduced here, so the HD model of this tank, where it was just losing a little bit of power. And I mean, the lower plate got slightly nerfed there, definitely. Rotation speed is now getting a bigger nerf here as well. View range nerf as well. View range speed, what the hell. Aim time is getting nerfed as well. Reload time is getting a little bit of a buff at least. And penetration is getting a bit of a buff, but penetration barely ever makes a difference. Most tanks have enough penetration. It's just same. So E3 is not going to be all that great anymore, maybe, but it's not a big change there. All right, next one on the American tech tree here, M48 Patton. And this tank, the medium tank with a lot of armor on the turret, especially more armor than the M60 has, does get reactive armor consumable, gear oil provision as well, and a reload time nerf. So let's just cut it down here. Reactive armor, 27% extra or 27% less damage taken. Quite nice to have, but I rather prefer having this on a tank where I actually intend to take shots, because mostly I'm trying to avoid getting hit until it's unavoidable, and those situations are very rare, or should be very rare at least. Gear oil provision definitely going to help, because again 6% to the engine power traverse, 4 kilometers per hour in reverse, and also forwards on top. So being in strong positions faster with a good hull down tank is definitely very helpful. DPM nerf, yeah, not that great. But anyways, M60 then. Also a very strong hull down tank, having even more gun depression, 2 degrees more gun depression than the M48. Generally my preference there over the M48, definitely. And it also gets some changes here. It does get the improved engine power boost consumable, so the special speed boost as I just call it, which is just allowing it to be super quick for a short amount of time. And I think that's really helpful to have on a hull down tank, allowing you to get into those super strong hull down positions earlier, allowing you to push someone out effectively, allowing you to run away if you are getting pushed onto. Special speed boost is one of my favorite consumables actually, so definitely going to be helpful. Also it does get the sandbag provisions for the hit points, so 6% more hit points, should be around 70 or so. Not all that great, but still something. For that you will lose a 3% crew mastery provision. So yeah, reload time gets a bit of a nerf as well, seems to be the case for many tanks here actually. Just keep the goals of wargaming in mind. They want to just make sure that the games are not over too quickly. Also, you do get a bigger change there to the speed shell velocity, which is just, wait, what is this actually this way? Shell speed would make sense, guys. But yeah, 1.5k to 1.1k, same as on the E50M. I'm not happy about this, will make me consider playing with a supercharger instead of the aim time equipment there. Yeah. So much about that. I think still overall the M60 is going to be better with those changes here. Sandbags, more hit points, more speed. That's definitely good to have. Moving on to the T95 Pilot here, low tier tank, getting some slight hit point buff, getting some power to weight ratio buff, getting some reload time buff, and the next tank, Sheridan. We stick to tier 10. Sheridan, light tank with a big alpha gun, is getting some slight penetration buff, is getting some slight top speed buff. Yeah, this is going to be speedy in this meta. All the light tanks are getting faster almost. Yeah, it's going to be very nice here actually. Alpha damage gets a bit of a buff, 10 extra on each, almost 10 at least on each ammunition type there. That's going to be helpful, definitely. For that you get a bit of a dispersion nerf on the move. And power to weight ratio does get a bit of nerf as well, which is not great, because you have to keep in mind that you need the acceleration, the power to weight ratio, if you want to get to that top speed in the first place, which is just, yeah, mostly you're struggling to reach that top speed if you're not having the acceleration available. All right, T57 on the last one here of the Americans. T57 getting a rotation speed nerf, getting an aim time nerf, quite a big one. I'm not happy about this, because T57 is known to be one of the most accurate autoloaders. It does get a bit of a maximum speed forwards reverse buff. Yeah, so slightly better. Slightly better speed here on the maximum speed. That is going to be good because the T57 doesn't have totally reliable armor. It doesn't have good power to weight ratio either, so it's quite slow. So yeah, I like having a bit more speed at least. It's still not going to be enough in my opinion. But I think the T57 will also kind of just keep its position as it is already. Moving on to the next autoloader here on the Americans as well. This is the M6 here, first of all, on the left side here. Aim time. Well, just keep in mind again, it has two guns. One small gun, one big one. We're actually starting with a big gun. Aim time. One 20mm gun, a big one, 4.6 to 5.4. That's a huge change there on the aim time, huge nerf. Still keep in mind it has the reticle calibration available, which decreases your aim time and also dispersion a lot. So I think it's still going to be playable with that one as well. Although I'm not a fan of the big gun, even because of the DPM lack there. Then the aim time of the small gun also gets a huge change, 3.7 to 4.8. That's even a bigger change. Previously I was not playing the small gun with the reticle calibration, only with the inter-clip speed consumable there. I will take both of those in the future then, definitely. That will be needed. Then power to weight ratio gets a slight buff here. Maximum speed also 3 km/h on top. Yeah, quite nice to have. But for that you also get an armor nerf. 175 to 160 on that frontal plate here. The frontal plate has been quite strong, barely penetrable, or just many people struggling to penetrate you there with AP, unless they are applying some strong TDs or are just above you. And of course, if they play with calibrated shells, premium ammunition, they will just penetrate you much easier there. But yeah, that's going to suck here because that frontal plate is really quite big, so you will get penetrated a lot more often there. Last American, I believe here, the T95E6, also with a power to weight ratio change. This time it is a nerf here from 18 to 16. Yeah, that's definitely something will be noticeable. And then a rotation speed buff nonetheless, by actually quite a bit, and an armor change as well. I think the main strength of the E6 is the mobility and also the fact that it has gun depression and DPM. So I'm not too happy about these changes, first of all. But it does get some armor buff here to the cupola from 220 to 248, which means that most enemies will then need heat or premium ammunition in general to penetrate that cupola on your head. So that is actually just decreasing the damage taken if you play hull down perfectly. But mostly it's not really like a static hull down playstyle tank. So I wonder if it really is going to have much of a difference. I don't know how many times I actually get penetrated into the cupola, but 28mm on top is really not nothing. And many more people will bounce you maybe. So let's see. I think E6 changes are not all too bad, especially for the more average players who are not using that mobility all too much. It's going to be very helpful. For the faster players like I am considering myself to be, then the cupola buff won't matter all too much. I think we are getting to that very last slide here, now to the Japanese tanks, with the STB1 getting some changes here to the reload time, 6.71 to 709. Yeah, quite some change. Speed, shell speed, shell velocity also getting a big nerf here, similar to the M60 and the E50M earlier. So also on this one I will then probably play with the supercharger, meaning it is an aim time nerf. So not a great one for me. Power to weight ratio also gets some bigger change here of about 10%. So that's also going to be quite a bit here. Then the maximum speed does increase from 53 to 56. But who cares if you don't have the option to reach that because your engine is too weak. So therefore STB will be a lot weaker, but let's keep in mind that it has been one of the strongest tanks in the game, among the mediums definitely. And this kind of change here, I think many of those won't be all that great, but still you can farm the enemy's hull down, so it's not going to be useless at all. On to Hori type, let's go for the Type 71 first here. Type 71 receives some nice changes. It does get a slight change to the reload time. Let's not care about that too much, slight nerf there. But the alpha of the gold shells does get buffed from 360 to 400, which is absolutely huge. Keep in mind that the standard ammunition only has like 420 alpha damage, so the premium ammunition is going to be almost the same damage per shot as the standard ammunition. And you are also just going to have, like you already do have, AP as a premium ammunition, which is just allowing you to penetrate all the weak spots, all the sights, all the spaced armor and stuff like that much easier than heat would be. So premium AP with 400 damage per shot on decent DPM, that is going to be very nice to have on a Type 71. Also, it does get a bit of a penetration buff on top still, although just a slight one. Type 71 definitely going to be an interesting choice for next season then, or next update. And we are coming to the Hori, which is the last one of this video, although it is quite a long video already. Hope you're still with me. Hori then, speed, shell speed changes. It had a very bad shell velocity actually. I often played this tank with supercharger, although not being the greatest fan of it. It does get a bit of a buff here to the shell velocity. The reload time also does get a buff, DPM buff, therefore rotation speed is getting a nerf though, but the rotation has been pretty fast already. Slight turret traverse dispersion nerf, although this tank doesn't have a turret, so it will be just dispersion on the traverse. Yeah, it doesn't really matter all too much, to be honest. I think it will just be even stronger than it already is. It is already very strong, and it will be even stronger. So I'm looking forward to those changes. This has been one video out of 3 about these changes in detail. So let me know your favorite tanks and see you on the next video.